Today we'll be talking about the Cold War. But particularly today we'll be talking about the space race in the Cold War. So before we get into the space race, what can all of you guys tell me about the Cold War? Some of you guys might have participated in the previous history lessons. So can you guys just shout out whatever you think you know about the Cold War?
It's about two powerful countries. It's communist Soviet Union and anti-communist America.
That's correct. So what was the Cold War? Well, the Cold War was a war. It wasn't really a war, but it was a period where two of the largest superpowers in the world, the United States and Soviet Union, were clashing. So they didn't believe in each other. So they didn't like each other. So what did they do? Well, they both had nuclear weapons. So they couldn't actually fight. Because if they fought each other directly, it would have been a nuclear war, which is bad because that would be something called MAD, or mutual mass destruction. So let me share my screen and maybe you guys can tell me more about it. All right. Can you see my screen right now? Yes? All right. So we were just talking about MAD, or mutual mass destruction, which means both countries have nuclear weapons, which means that they kind of agree that we shouldn't use nuclear weapons because that would just harm a lot of people. All right, before we start on to the space race, could anybody tell me what these three pictures are? Does anybody recognize the pictures? They all represent a very famous event during the Cold War. Would anybody know?
No, I don't know.
It's the one picture is about separating two parts of Berlin, I think. The wall is separating.
That's correct. Great job. So the middle one is called the Berlin Wall. Have anybody heard of this? The Berlin Wall.
Yes, I heard it before.
Yep. So what the Berlin Wall was, it was a wall in Germany that separated East and West Berlin. So because these two Berlins were different. One was communist, one was anti-communist. That's why they built this wall, to separate them. And this is very important in the Cold War, but we're not going to be talking about this today. All right. Does anybody else know the other two that is on screen right now? Nope. Okay. I'll tell you guys. So the first picture you see on the left is Cuba. And this famous event that is on the screen right now is called the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Wait, I have a question. Is it like they're in a war and then is the babies are left and they were put in, and then lots of had to put them in a different place, and then they have to war?
No, that is very close. So what the Cuban Missile Crisis was that the Soviet Union was really close with Cuba, because
they placed missiles on Cuba?
Yes, that's correct. So Cuba was really close with Soviet Union. So the Cubans, or the people in Cuba, said, okay, I'll let you put missiles on my land, because this way, whenever there's going to be a war, you can always fire your missiles faster because you're so much closer to the United States. And this really scared United States, because they're like, oh no, there's really bad people right in front of my country. So that was a really, really scary time, because people were threatening to have a nuclear war, which is really, really bad. All right. So the picture on the right over here is actually of the Korean War.
Oh yeah, it's when North and South Korea when Korea was split into North and South.
That's correct. So this war was the defining war that really split Korea into two. Half of them were communist, half of them were supported by the Americans, and they had a really great war, a really big war. And what happened is that Korea, which was before one country, because they have two ideologies or two different thoughts, two people thinking different things, they created the two new countries, which is now North Korea and South Korea. All right. Any questions about this? Nope. All right, great. So we just refreshed some of the information and things that Russell talked about in November when he talked about the Cold War. But now I am going to be focusing on a different aspect of the Cold War. The aspects that I was talking about before right now is mostly war, really violent, a lot of fighting, a lot of threatening, and a lot of death. But today we'll be talking about something different. We're going to be talking about the space race. All right, with that being said, what can any of you guys... Yes?
What is a space race? Wait, do they just race and then to get to and then whoever goes back to the beginning wins?
That's a great question. So this is what I'm going to be talking about right now. So what was the space race? Well, the space race was a race between the United States and the Soviet Union.
Wait, teacher, I thought you said Soviet. Like I thought you said Soviet. I thought you said Soviet Union.
Oh, yeah. So it's the Soviet Union, which is basically the communist versus the anti-communist. And what they're trying to do is that they're trying to prove to each other who has the better technology or the better scientists, because they're trying to be the first person to go into space. Because before this time, nobody ever even went into space. Planes, as I talked about last week, planes were only invented in the early 1900s, the 1910s. So in 40 years, they want to go into space because it is a move that shows your domination over the other country, which is very important in this period, because morale, or what people in your country think, is really, really important to win wars. All right. So what is a space race? Is it really a race like you see in the Olympics? Well, no. It was just a competition between the two countries to see who can be the first person to create a rocket ship or anything that can bring them into space. All right. Any questions on this? Nope. Oh, I see a question from Kai. Or is that Jimmy?
Why did they want to go into the space?
Oh, yes, great question. Well, they want to go into space because it's what we call a power move. So it makes you feel more dominant. You feel like I'm stronger because I can go to space. So there wasn't really there's not really a good reason to it. It was just a way to show that I am the better country. And moreover, if space is a really large place. So if you can control space, you can control a lot of things. It can be easier for you to maybe direct missiles at the other country. So what they thought is that if we can control space, we can control a lot of things, and we can be able to have a better chance when we fight a war. So it was all about fighting wars.
But why do they have to fight? But why do they count them friendly?
Sorry, could you? Say that
Why
again.
do they have to fight even if they are all friends and neighbors?
Yes. So United States and Soviet Unions were not neighbors. They were very far apart, and they're both really strong. And when you're strong,
What about the Samaritans?
the Samaritans,
Yeah, Samaritans, the old people.
right? Good question. So there's a very interesting story in the Bible called the Good Samaritan, which said that
Which I've heard the story.
yes,
With
that's
my
correct.
Brenia.
So the Great Samaritan talked about how a person that didn't really go together helped their enemy. Well, not in this case. Soviet Union and the United States were really butting heads. They really didn't like each other. They had different ideology, so they didn't really see head to head. They can't agree on anything. That's why they really fight. And when they're really large countries, when they're really large countries, they have a lot of power. So what do powerful people want? They want more power. This is why they feel like Soviet Union is a threat to their safety. That's why they want to take them out. But in the case of a space race, it's just to show their domination. All right. With that, let's move on to the next slide. So with that being said, this is the starting point of the space race. So it's all about who can do
first
the first.
Man-made satellite.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So we'll be first talking about the first man-made or human-built satellite that they put into space. Would anybody know what is the name of this first satellite?
No. I don't know.
Nope.
No.
All right. So I'll write it on the screen. So the first satellite was actually created and put into space by the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union kind of won the first step.
Tick 1, right?
Close, Jasper, close. So it's called the Sputnik.
Oh,
Sputnik 1.
Sputnik.
I thought Sputnik. Sputnik. Oh.
Sputnik 1.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, because Sputnik is actually Russian. It means traveler in Russian. So Sputnik is this really small object, basically a sphere you can see on the screen, that was launched into orbit, which means it is circling Earth. That's what the orbit means.
Wait, teacher, I have a question. Why does it look so big?
Sorry?
Even if it looks so big, even it looks so small, like when we're looking at it, if it's so small. Is it like this small?
No, so it is this big. It's pretty small compared to satellites we have nowadays. But it was a very important first step, though.
So nowadays, it's like very huge.
Yes, that's correct. They're towers basically at this point.
What? Towers? Oh.
They're really, really large. But Sputnik was the first man-made satellite created by the Soviet Union.
So they are very powerful, right?
Mm-hmm. And it was launched in 1957 on October the 4th. This is not only really important because it was the first step into the space race, but it's how they launched the satellite that also really mattered. They launched this first satellite using a ballistic missile. A ballistic missile is a missile that can reach really long lengths and fire this really, really, really powerful gunpowder at a different country. And having Soviet Union use this ballistic missile to send this satellite into space, they proved that they have ballistic missiles capable in reaching the United States, which is really scary because the United States didn't think Soviet Union had the ability to be able to shoot rockets to America. All right. Any other questions about this? Nope. Oh, is that Kai?
how did they launch it into space?
Yes. So as I said, they used what is called a ballistic missile.
Wait, teacher.
Yes. So what a ballistic missile is basically a really large rocket. So I'll just draw out a really small rocket. So it probably looked something like this. So a very basic rocket, and the probe or the satellite will be sitting in the top of the rocket. And this is how they launched this rocket into space, using a missile. All right. With that being said, let's move on to the next slide. So, Soviet Union just launched their first ever satellite before America. So this really scared America because they don't want to lose this race, because it really mattered to see who is the actual stronger superpower. So America hits back and fights back by launching their own satellite too. And this is America's first satellite. Would anybody know what this first satellite's called? No? All right. So
Can you repeat your question?
What was the name of America's first satellite? Okay. The name of America's first satellite was called Explorer 1.
Oh.
It was the first satellite in space. It was
Wait,
launched
teacher.
in 1958. Yes.
This really looks like what I see when I see an YouTube. I search for those things, like I see these things like going up, like I like go there, like I see them, like yeah, going around in YouTube.
That's correct. So this is a satellite, and it was America's first in 1958. This was so that they can match against Soviet Union, because they don't want Soviet Union to actually win.
Oh, so that's why.
All right, moving on.
Well, that's really weird. That why do they want to? Still very weird.
Yes. So there's sometimes these things that these large countries do, they don't really make sense. But there is a reason for all of this. And in this case, the reason is really vague. It was just a move to show that I'm stronger than you. So they have to win the race. All right. With that, after America launched their first satellite, they realized that the Soviet Union is also trying to go into space. So they can't be left behind. So what did they do? Well, America creates this new organization called NASA in the same year, 1958. Does anybody know what NASA stands for? Would anybody want to take a guess?
I don't think so.
I think.
Like.
Okay, Jasper, would you like to take a guess? We have somebody named the space race that raised their hand. Okay, would anybody want to take a guess?
National. I don't know the A, and national. I don't know, and space administration.
Good job. So you got most of it. So national, a space administration. I'll fill in the blank right here. So the full name is the National Aeronautic And in here, we have another word, and. National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So they will be the public or government entity that is in charge of sending future satellites into space. All right. And just for some more information, the creation of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration was created by President D. Eisenhower. He is the person that started
D. Eisenhower is a president?
Dwight D. Eisenhower. That is his full name.
He's a general.
No, he was also a president.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any questions about NASA? Nope. Okay, great. We'll keep moving. So with that, both nations, both Soviet Union and United States, both have government administrations to send spaceships. So what do? Well, they have to pick up the pace to make sure that they don't lose this space race. So what happens? Well, after you send things into the space, what is the next step? In Soviet Union's mind, that would be sending the first probe to the moon. So Luna 2 was another satellite or probe created by the Soviet Union and was the first probe to be able to get to the moon and revolve around it. So this is also something monumental because this means that the Soviet Union were able to calculate how to launch something from Earth and be able to hit the moon. Because you have to remember, both the Earth and the moon are rotating. So to do this is really hard. And the Soviet Union proved to America or the United States that they have the ability to send things into orbit the moon. And well, this is a very big hit to America again. So what's next? Well, the Soviet Union did something unthinkable again, and before United States. And that was sending the first person into space. This is really monumental because this person is the first person to ever leave this planet and go into outer space. And this was another feat achieved by Soviet Union. Does anybody know the name of the first person in space?
Yeah, I think
I'm not sure.
Would you like to take a guess? It's a very odd name.
Benjamin?
Good guess.
Monopoly?
First.
So let me tell you about. Yes.
Is his name Yuri or something?
Great, good job. So his first name was Yuri, last name Gagarin.
Gagarin
so
and
weird.
Alexeyevich. I have no idea how to pronounce his middle name.
Mm-hmm. So this person, from Soviet Union, was the first person in space, and he orbited the Earth before going back to Soviet Union. And the spacecraft that he did this in was called Vostok 1.
Well, that's kind of weird.
Yes. So all of these words are in Russian. So that's why they don't sound natural to us. All right. Any questions about this?
How old did he? Never mind.
Mm. So you wanted to ask how old was the first person in space?
Yeah.
Good question. So how old was Yuri Gagarin when he went to space? He actually died really young. He died at the age of 34 because unfortunately, he died from a disease. But before he died at the age of 34, he was the first person in space in the when he was 27 years old.
Oh, okay. That's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. So he was actually pretty young when he went into space.
Wait. So it was young. So it was young. Okay, that was unacceptable because young kids, like, young kids can't like go out of space because it's very dangerous for them to be alone.
Yes, that's correct. And because of a lot of differences, because in space there is no gravity, so you don't feel the same as on Earth. You feel like there's nothing pulling you down. And also, because of this zero gravity, your bones will change. It will condense and will become smaller.
I also heard that you will grow tall.
Yes, because things would expand and contract. So with this, that's why going to space is very dangerous for children too, or people that are young, because your body is still growing. And what we call microgravity is really dangerous because we don't know what it will do to a human body yet. All right. With that being said, let's move on. So, with all of that, Soviet Union did, sending the first probe into space, being the first country to be able to have something orbit the moon, and being the country that sent the first person into space. This seems really one-sided battle right now, right? It seems like the Soviet Union is winning every part of this race. They were always the first, and America was always left behind. Well, what does America do, or United States do right now? Well, then this comes the president's boldest claim. And the president here was John F. Kennedy. And he was the person that created this bold claim that United States was going to create this project called Project Apollo and send a person to space by 1970s. So within 10 years, they want to go from being able to orbit the Earth to having somebody land onto the moon, which is a really, really bold claim. Because to do something that huge in 10 years is really, really, really hard. And this was a very famous speech that he did in 1962, where he claimed that the United States is going to land somebody on the moon by the end of the decade. Any questions?
No, I don't guess so.
All right, perfect. So, well, the president made this claim that they want to go to the moon. So what did they do? Well, they work really, really hard and having the government giving them 500% budget. So they have 5 times the money for the next 10 years to make this happen. And for the first time ever, it happened. And in 1969, on July 16th, Apollo and the spacecraft was called Apollo 11, was the first ever spaceship to be able to land on the moon and successfully have people walk on the moon. And the very famous line that was the first ever line spoken on the moon was by a person called Neil Armstrong. And that quote was, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And it's one of the most famous quotes right now because he was the first ever person to be able to step onto the moon. All right. Would anybody know the other 2 names of the other 2 people on that mission? Does anybody know? No? Okay. So
I think I know.
Okay. Jasper, would you like to take a guess?
This is so hard.
I don't
It's
think
fine.
I can guess.
Yeah, no problem. So Neil Armstrong is the first person to step onto the moon. The second person that people know about was his name is Buzz Aldrin. Well, Buzz was his kind of nickname. His first name was Edwin. So Mr. Buzz Aldrin was the second person to ever land on the moon. And what is really important about this is that there was also a third person. His name was Michael Collins. Although he wasn't able to step onto the moon because he was in charge of the lunar lander. So the thing that orbited around the moon to ensure that the people on the moon can return back to Earth. These are the three people that were able to make the first mission onto the moon successful. Any questions about that? Nope. All right, we will move on to the next thing. Well, within 7 years of President Kennedy's claim that they want to land on the moon, they did it. In 1969, 1 year before the deadline, they were able to send 3 people into space and having 2 people walk on the moon. Well, with that, really marks the end of the space race because with this really strong last push by John F. Kennedy, America was able to win the space race, and they were the first people to be able to land somebody on the moon.
Well, that's kind of scary.
Of course, you're out of this world, and there's nothing that really can help you if something goes wrong. So it was really scary for these people to go to the moon.
Well, that's not scary. That's super scary. Like, it might die or starve to hunger and die.
Mm-hmm, that's correct. And that almost happened to another spacecraft called Apollo 13. Apollo 13 was an aircraft that was supposed to go after Apollo 11. And they had some really big errors or a really fatal error in their spacecraft, and they were forced to act on it. And that was really scary because if they didn't act right, they could have died. All right. With that, let's go on to the next slide.
Yay.
So that marks the end of the space race. I didn't talk a lot about the Soviet Union because most of the flights that they made were failures, and none of them really achieved as much as what America did. Most of the flights that came from the Soviet Union did not make it into orbit.
Okay, that is pretty sad.
Mm-hmm. So now America has just won the space race. So what happens now? Well, to make sure that they end this off peacefully, because the Cold War is kind of coming to the end at this point, they created a joint program called the Apollo-Soyuz program, which was kind of the stamp that ended the space race, because this moment meant that the America and Soviet Union were coming together to create this one space station in space and kind of just make peace with each other and ended the space race. All right.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was the defining moment that ended the space race, with America and Soviet Union coming together to create the Apollo-Soyuz International Space Mission. Any questions about this?
I don't think so because wait, I don't think so. I don't have anything to say.
All right. So we talked a lot about the space race. So,
well, I still don't get it. Why do they have to fight?
Well, because they don't like each other. That's what they fight.
Well, you should still love others as if they don't like you.
Yeah, of course. But unfortunately, these two countries didn't look eye to eye. They all wanted to kill each other. And if America didn't act, Soviet Union would have killed everybody in America and made the whole
Wow.
world communist. And they didn't
That's
want that.
really
So they were just fighting each other. And with the space race, it was actually really peaceful because the space race, nothing really disastrous happened. They were just trying to fight each other to assert a dominance onto the other country. So thankfully, the space race was rather peaceful. All right. With that, I'm going to show a very short YouTube clip so we can we can round this off. All right. Give me a second.
This looks like Star Wars. This looks like
The
Star
world saw a
Wars.
competition between the world's two great powers, the democratic capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union. Both sides would fight to have the best technology in space, and who could achieve the firsts. As World War II was coming to an end, the Americans and the Soviets captured Germany's rocket engineers and their rocket technology, including V-2s. One recruitment of particular value for the Americans was the rocket engineer Wernher von Braun, who would lead the US program. The Soviets, meanwhile, would recruit Ukraine-born Sergei Korolev to lead the Soviet space program. In 1955, both countries announced that they would be launching satellites into orbit. The Soviet Russians took the lead by becoming the first to put a successful satellite into orbit when they launched Sputnik 1 on October 4, 1957. Unfortunately for the Americans, their successful launch of their first satellite, Explorer 1, would come a whole 4 months later. Next would come another remarkable achievement, and it would go again to the Soviets. The first man in space. In April 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first person to orbit the Earth, traveling in the spacecraft Vostok 1. When he came back to Earth, Gagarin became a hero of the Soviet Union and a celebrity worldwide. The lagging US launched the Freedom 7 3 weeks later, and astronaut Alan Shepard became the first American in space. The Americans were embarrassed at being behind the Soviet Union, and on May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a bold claim to Congress that America would be the first to land a man on the moon, and they would do it before the end of the decade. The Apollo program was launched. Meanwhile, in February 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth, and on June 16, 1963, Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman to travel into space.
Teacher,
NASA now had an
wait,
Yep.
the people look all the same. What's wrong with, like, that's kind of weird. This cartoon. The people, the cartoon
Well,
people.
because this is it's a YouTube video, so
Uh,
in order to save time, they just drew the same people.
okay, that's kind of weird.
its budget to achieve its daunting goal of putting America on the moon first, and by the end of the decade. As well as the Apollo program, it launched the Gemini program, which would develop the technology needed for the former. Gemini would see the first American, Ed White, to walk in space, although the Soviets achieved the first when Alexei Leonov achieved a spacewalk for 12 minutes and 9 seconds a few months before. And Gemini would also see the first docking of 2 spacecraft together in Earth's orbit. After many test flights, training, and experiments, the Apollo 11 spacecraft was launched into space on July 16, 1969. On board were U.S. astronauts Neil Armstrong, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. It was not smooth sailing. Malfunctions came up, and the lunar module named the Eagle had to be landed manually. On July 20th, 1969, the Eagle had landed on the moon's surface. Neil Armstrong stepped outside, becoming the first man to walk on the moon. He would say those famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." By landing on the moon first, and with Soviet lunar landing attempts failing between 1969 and 1972, America had won the space race. And now that it had been achieved, interest in the lunar missions was dying down. By the 70s, US-Soviet relations improved, and in 1975, a joint program between the two powers called the Apollo-Soyuz mission would send 3 US astronauts aboard an Apollo spacecraft and dock in orbit with the Soviet Soyuz vehicle. The first joint US-Soviet spaceflight and the handshake between the commanders of both crafts symbolized the improvements of US-Soviet relations in the late Cold War. What's your favorite moment in the space race? Leave a comment below. Subscribe to see more history.
All right. So that video kind of summed up everything I was talking about the Cold War. So now let's go back. Let's go back to my screen and my PowerPoint and talk about what happens to the space program after the Cold War. Well, America really didn't want to stop because they feel like this is such a great opportunity to discover other planets, or even just have scientists go up there to do a lot of experiments in space. So the next thing that America created was called the Space Shuttle Program. And this program was created in 1977, and it marked the start of a new era of space exploration, because instead of using rockets to send people in space, they were able to use space shuttles, which made the trip much more easier and more comfortable for the astronauts. And this was a very interesting time because this marked a new development in technology. So in this program, there was a total of 6 different space shuttles. There are 2 that should be really famous. So would anybody want to tell me a name of a space shuttle that flew in the program? Does anybody know? Nope. Okay, that's all right. So let me list out the 6 names of the space shuttle. The first name, or the first space shuttle, was Columbia. Then we have Challenger. Then we had Discovery. The next one was called Atlantis. Next, Endeavour. And actually, the first ever flight into space was in 1977, was using the shuttle called Enterprise. But the most famous space shuttle, I would think, is actually the Challenger shuttle because of the 1986 disaster. So in 1986, unfortunately, because of a damage to one of the parts on the spaceship, the Challenger blew up when they were launching off. The Challenger unfortunately blew up and killed all 14 people in the spaceship. As a result, this program was actually halted for 3 years from 1986 to 1989. And in these 3 years, a lot of new changes came onto these spaceships too. There were new wings, new jet fuel, and new engine designs to make these spaceships more safe. But unfortunately, there was another large disaster that happened to the space shuttle program. In 2003, Columbia also had a disaster. And unfortunately, when on descent, Columbia blew up too. And this was because of a wing damage sustained onto the space shuttle. And with those two incidents, Columbia marked the end of the space shuttle era, which went from 1977 for the first ever flight to 2010, the last ever flight of a space shuttle. And within this 40-year period, the space shuttle program did a lot of things that humans thought was unachievable. But unfortunately, because the space shuttle was not really safe, and up to the current standards for safety, because back then safety standards were much lower, they unfortunately retired all of the space shuttles, and now nobody has flown in over 20 years in space. But fortunately, this is only the American space program. There are also different space programs that are still flying. And with all of these programs coming together, they created something called the International Space Station. And the International Space Station actually started building really, really early, because it's such a large thing in space. It will take years for people to create this. And they had to create it bit by bit and send these bits up into space to create this large space station. And finally, the International Space Station was completed in 1999. And it marked the first space station that was permanently revolving in space, and is able to sustain a group of people and live there for up to six to 9 months, which is really crazy to think about. And this space station was actually a combined effort of all of the largest space agencies in the world, from NASA to Russia. From America with NASA. We have Russia, we have Japan, we have China, and we have Canada. All of the largest space agencies, or basically government public companies, they are able to create this large station and send people into space. All right. So all of this that we're talking about is mostly about America. So does anybody know what is the largest contribution that Canada made to this International Space Station? So we can take this back closer to us. Does anybody know? It's on the picture. It's the bottom picture. Would anybody know what that is? Maybe you learned it in school. Maybe you read it somewhere. Nope. No idea. Okay. So the name of this thing, or arm-looking thing, is actually just called the Canadarm, or the Canada arm. What this is basically a mechanical arm that can be placed, that is outside the International Space Station. And this arm is used to repair damage from on the outside of the space shuttle. And this is the largest contribution that Canada has made to the International Space Station. And it is very important because this arm is what allows people to be able, for people to explore the outer space outside the space station, and also be able to make really important repairs to the space station, especially if there's damage. Yep. All right. Any questions about this? Nope. Oh, is that Kai with a question?
How did they make it?
Great question. So how did they make it? It's such a large thing. Well, first of all, they're just really, really small moving parts, and they use and it's really it's a part that is really rigid, so it stands up to wear and tear. And there's a lot of motors that create this arm that is able to move in space. And they create it on Earth and ship it up into space part by part and install it onto the International Space Station so they can use it in space. And it's a very difficult process to make something like this, because one, it's really large, and two, it has to be able to withstand the pressure of space. Okay, with that, let's end off on the last slide for today. We've all been talking about what has been in the past and what happened to space. Well, unfortunately, the International Space Station is to be retired by around 2030. So in around 10 years, the International Space Station will be left alone to burn up in space. And they will be creating a new space station, most possibly, because the International Space Station is almost, at this point, 30 to 40 years old, and they must replace the whole thing now. Yeah. So what's next? Does anybody know what is happening with the space and space programs right now? Does anybody have any idea? Nope. All right. So what is the next thing with space shuttles and exploration of space? Well, I said that there hasn't been exploration of space in over 10 years, almost 20 years at this point, because unfortunately of the Columbia and Challenger disasters with space shuttles. So NASA had to reorganize and recreate these space shuttles, but they did not have enough funding to keep creating these shuttles. So what happened is that now a lot of private companies are sending space shuttles.
Michael.
Into space. Yes.
What is funding?
Sorry?
What is funding?
Funding. Oh, yes. That just means money. So they ran out of money. NASA, because they're a government program, the government didn't give them enough money. So unfortunately, they could not keep themselves creating all of these really great inventions. So I hope you guys might have heard of this company or this next new company that is the next large company that can send things back into space. And they're led by one person. I've heard you probably heard of him. His name is Elon Musk. And he is the founder and the founder or the creator of a company called SpaceX. So you probably heard of his other company called Tesla, but Elon Musk is also in charge of a different company called SpaceX. And this is the next largest company after NASA that is able to send people and things into space. And SpaceX marks the first time in America in 10 years that somebody has sent something into orbit, and Elon Musk has achieved it. He was able to send people and supplies to the International Space Station using his rockets, his Falcon 9 rockets, and also his Dragon capsule, which is really, really impressive. All right. Any questions about any of this? Nope. All right.
Oh, no, yes? I don't think so. No, I don't know.
Yes. Kai, I see there's a question. Or is it Jimmy?
But how did they build this station and how did the rocket take off?
Oh, great question. So how did they build the station? Well, of course, there's a lot of materials. So this was built on Earth. So they have a lot of people and they have a lot of large construction machines to create this platform for this rocket to lift off. And how does the rocket lift off? Well, this is very interesting chemistry, basically there's a lot of reaction that happens within this engine that blows a lot of hot gases and airs down towards the Earth. And because there's this hot combustible gas, it lights up and creates this large boom. And they control that boom. And with that boom, the rocket lifts off because the gas is pushing against the Earth and pushing the rocket up into space. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right. So with that, that is the end of the slides and the end of the lessons. I hope you guys learned something today. And yeah, if you guys don't have any questions, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week for different classes.